he talks about abstraction in a negative sense. And this, I was like blowing my mind because I've only ever heard abstraction to be mentioned as a good thing, right? More abstraction is better. Abstraction is good. No one ever questions the abstractions. Hello, this is Felienne.
And this is Hanna.
And this is another episode of Computer Science, of course.
Computer science.
Of course. Computer science.
Of course.
This is Computer Science.
Of course.
Of course.
Hi, Felienne.
Hey, Hanna.
So today we have another book that is already one of my favorite books, even though I haven't read it yet, if I'm allowed to have it as a favorite book. But you have read it?
Yes, I did. It is Computer Power and Human Reason by Joseph Weizenbaum.
And it has been written about 50 years ago?
Yeah, exactly 50 years ago.
We can celebrate it, an anniversary edition.
It
Yay.
deserves that for sure.
Okay, and in the past we had some books where you said it's outdated. Is this one outdated?
Very little parts of it are. Yes, there's a few where you're like, oh, this didn't age well, but no. On the large, no, hardly. There's so much in there that is, you don't know if it's really like prescient or that if he was just very lucky. I mean, I could write some random stuff down now and maybe in 50 years, a few of them will be true. So maybe partly it was a little bit lucky. Because that's the interesting thing also. We will go into detail, I think, later in the episodes that I think for 40 years reading this book was like, this is bonkers, right? This has no bearing on anything in reality. And now because of LLMs, because of the current version of LLMs as we have it now, a lot of it became true. That I think when he was writing it, it was exaggerated. But then sort of reality caught up with his fears. And then is this because he was very fearful? Is this because part of the things he was seeing were on a certain arc?
Yeah, we'll get to that later. Maybe first tell the listeners a little bit, what is the book about?
So this book has a very interesting backstory. Joseph Weizenbaum can be called the creator of the first chatbot in the meaning that we have for chatbot now. He made a chatbot called ELIZA, which was supposed to be like satire or a parody of psychotherapy. Whereas you can ask this chatbot a question like, oh, I'm really sad. And then he will mimic a therapist saying something like, oh, but what are you sad about? And then, my dad. Do you want to tell me more about your dad? So it does this very simple linguistic replacement. It's not in any way as evolved or complex as modern day LLMs. And still he observed that people attributed to the machine a lot of emotion and personality and thinking. And sort of, I want to say after that, but I don't think, having read the whole book, it was like this one epiphany, like, oh, I saw people interact with the chatbot. Now I've changed my mind entirely. I think there's a lot of other things he saw before as well. But around the same time, it's like, well, wait a minute. This whole idea that we should let computers do stuff, it's just a really bad idea. That's sort of the book. So it tries to explain why it's a bad idea to have computers do things. Some things.
Which things? Which things should computers not do?
So he talks about making decisions. That's very interesting. Somewhere in the book, and I really like this, he contrasts making a decision or deciding with choosing. And he says that those words aren't synonyms. Because he says, well, maybe a computer can make a decision. Maybe a decision can be calculated. But choosing is something different. And I really like this because how often do people make bad decisions, right? But those are choices. Just simple stuff like, I can calculate I should go to bed now, right? It is 10 p.m. Tomorrow I have to teach early in the morning. I should go to bed. If I do math, I will. But, right, I'm hanging out with my friends and it is in the sun and we're having fun. So I choose not to make the right decision. And of course, there's many other situations in which we choose rather than decide. And then he sort of says that maybe computers can make a decision, but you can make a decision by flipping a coin or any sort of calculation. But choosing is an ethical and a moral evaluation that a computer shouldn't do.
Excellent. So kind of we moved from what computers can do in prior episodes to what computers should and shouldn't do.
And he says this himself. So Weizenbaum himself notes this. So what computers can't do appeared in 1972 for the first time. And then this book is 4 years later. Probably he wrote it a little bit earlier. And he specifically says that while Dreyfus argues that things computers can't do, he talks about what computers shouldn't do. So in some places in the book, he argues that even if a computer could do it, then what it does is something different than what a person does. And this choosing and deciding is one of the examples, although maybe we'll go into that as well. Some parts of the book are still also devoted to what computers can't do. I also don't think they are the strongest parts of the argument. But of course, this is also part of it. Like the fact that we don't think computers can do it well can also be part of the argument why they shouldn't do it. The part of the book are still devoted to what they cannot do.
Okay, and is it also partly about what they should do? Or is it just really signaling what they shouldn't do?
It's signaling what they shouldn't do, yes.
Okay.
Although, some examples like big calculations, that's fine. I'm like, Of course, computers then were really, really, really different. This is why it's so interesting that he has all these hypotheses about a robot therapist or a judge. Those are the things that people were talking about then and trying to build. Some of the big names, Herb Simon and John McCarthy, are also named in the book and quoted like, this is what they're saying they're doing. Of course, now 50 years later, a lot of people are actually doing them at the level where people allow them in those spaces at a level that was certainly not true in 1976. I don't think people were then seriously considering replacing judges by computers. There's much more a higher level of seriousness in debates around that now.
And can you give us a bit more context? Where did he write this book? What was his environment?
So he's also at MIT, like also where Dreyfus were, or of course many of the pioneers were, which I think is interesting because I didn't know about these people, about Dreyfus or about Weizenbaum, that because of their objections, because of their criticism, they've sort of been removed from even the story of ELIZA, which, if you don't take into account what he did afterwards, it's like, that's very cool, a first robotherapist. But because then you have to talk about Weizenbaum and then you have to talk about his criticism. We don't talk about these people. But of course, they were also, especially Weizenbaum a bit more than Dreyfus, pioneers of AI in having built this first system that, if you play with it a little bit, it does a decent job.
Yes, I've talked to it just before our episode to warm up. It was a weird conversation. I think I've been ruined by current LLMs. So
yes, of course. But 5 years ago, it would have been somewhat impressive.
Definitely. And it's impressive for the time when it was built. So I started reading the book, but I didn't get that far yet. It seemed to me more like a philosophy book than a computer science book. What was your impression?
Oh, that's great. Well, I of course made some notes, but now we're all the way to my final notes. I love it. My final note was, who is this book for? Right? And this is, I think, the same tension that you're hinting at. Who is this book for? So I think, first and foremost, this is a book for Weizenbaum himself. Somewhere in the book, I don't have the exact quotation, but somewhere he says a lot about like taking a moral stance. And taking a position is good, even though it doesn't help. So he talks about, it's the Vietnam War. So he talks about scientists that were working with the American government in the war. And then it's very heinous story. I didn't know this. So instead of bombing people in Vietnam, they made a line between the two parts of Vietnam with mines. And then there were scientists contributing to this project. And then they were calculating how much less suffering there would be with the mines versus the bombs. So then it would be, better. And then he spoke with some of them and he was like, well, shouldn't you just have objected to the whole idea? We should say no bombing, not mines instead of bombing is better. And then apparently one of them said, we could have taken a moral stand, but what good would that have done? So they're very much thinking from a practical perspective. And then the next sentence says, the good of a moral act is inherent in the act itself. So I see this book as Weizenbaum sort of confession saying, oops, I participated in this field. I changed my mind. I don't like them people anymore. They are not doing a good job. Let me write this down for me. That's how I read it. Of course, I also felt this book was, for me, Felienne in 2026 or 25 when I read it. It made me happy that this book existed. It made me specifically happy that a computer person was writing this book. But I don't think this is a book that was written with a specific audience in mind that was thinking, oh, who is this for? What do they know? It is, to a certain extent, a random collection of thoughts of his, of which some is useful and others are, yes, this whole chapter about how programming is like gambling, like programmers get addicted to programming. I think that in itself is a very interesting thought. I think we should talk about that more, how addictive it is as a programmer. I'm like, yeah, I recognize this, right? Oh, just like, if I do this and it works, or just like one more feature. That was super fun, recognizable, and interesting. But it's in the middle of AI criticism. And it doesn't really link these things together. It's not like the first chapter is, hey, reader, I will make 5 arguments, which is a bit like Dreyfus's work is. He's more of a rhetoric. He's like, oh, this and then this. It's just like every chapter is some thoughts. Many are good thoughts, but it isn't a book for a certain audience, even though it was a book for me in this year.
Perfect.
If that makes sense.
Yes, it makes total sense. So you think this book was also a bit of a moral act to write it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad he wrote it down.
Me too.
Now we started at the end of your notes, and you told me before we started recording that you have 211.
Yes. Yes. Let's talk about a quote from early on in the book that I love so much that I put it in my bio in Blue Sky. And this quote is, this is reflecting on building ELIZA. He says, what I had not realized is that extremely short exposures to a relatively simple computer program could induce powerful delusional thinking in quite normal people.
Yes, I think that is about how far I got. There's this anecdote about his secretary close to that, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
You want to tell it?
Yes, this story has become somewhat legendary in the last few years. Before, I hadn't heard about this guy. But now that we started talking about him, there's this account of his secretary that asked him to leave the room so that in private she could chat with ELIZA because she gives so good advice and she listened so carefully. And I think this is at least how he depicts it. One of these moments is like, she's a normal person. She's addicted to chatting with the computer. Oops.
Yeah.
And I think this is true. We see this now in reality, right? So this is also what I was hinting at before, that 50 years ago, I think this just would have been quite an unreasonable statement, right?
Yes.
Because most people didn't have access to ELIZA for decades and decades.
Yes.
So if I had been forced to read this as an undergrad, let's say, right? This is what I talk about often, like, oh, computer people should read more of this. Only now does this make sense to maybe some undergrads in computer science. Had I been forced to read this in the early 2000s, I'll be like, this guy, right? What? So only because we now have ChatGPT and everything that followed after it, does this become reasonable? Was it reasonable then? It's hard for me to say. But certainly now, this is like, yeah, this is my neighbor, my uncle, my sister, right? My best friend. This is them. It is true.
Yeah, I noticed that recently I talked to Google AI suddenly and I said thank you at the end. And then I noticed what I did and I decided to from now on just always write fuck you instead of thank you. Yeah, just to remind myself what I'm dealing with. It's worse enough that I'm talking to it anyway, but if I talk to it, I will not say thank you.
And what I also like one more quote, it's a bit later in the book, but also it's sort of, it makes me feel so good that stuff happened before. That made me feel less alone. So he's describing, and again, this is 76, right? It has happened many times in the history of computation that some technological advance in computer hardware or programming has triggered a virtually euphoric mania.
Yes.
Like 76. What euphoric manias were before that? I don't even want to know.
Yeah. And is there a tattoo-worthy quote? Because last time you had a quote that you wanted to tattoo on your back.
Oh, yes. Oh, can I have one? So here he's talking about how computers are just not people. And first he says that I will do 3 in a row. They don't come in a row in the book, but we do them in a row here. There are problems which confront man, but which can never confront machines. Next quote. What could it mean to speak of risk, courage, trust, endurance, and overcoming when one speaks of machines? Right? A computer cannot overcome something. Oh, he had a stutter as a kid and then sort of did something about it. But then the most beautiful of the triplets is this one. Sometimes when my children were little, my wife and I would stand over them as they lay sleeping in their beds, and we spoke to each other in silence, rehearsing a scene as old as mankind itself. Like literal, where's my camera? Literal goosebumps.
Yeah.
You can speak in silence. And then also, so that in itself, if the sentence would have ended there, it would be beautiful that you can speak in silence. I wrote in a Dutch language newspaper article a while ago that not everything can be called in words, because you can say there are no words. I think you can also say this in English. Like
Yes.
if your parents die, you can say there are no words. And the other person will know what you mean. So this is sort of that, right? So already this we spoke in silence is beautiful. But also then him connecting this to all other people, rehearsing a scene as old as mankind itself. So that you, as a parent, you feel connected to other parents and to your kids and their kids. And
Yeah.
a computer cannot. It's incredible that we need to argue this. But we do, and he does it beautifully in many places.
Wonderful.
Oh, wait. I want to contrast this with something else. It's by McCarthy. So, what a contrast with John McCarthy that Weizenbaum cites in the book as having said, in order to succeed in formalizing every aspect of the real world, we are lacking a sufficiently powerful logical calculus. I am currently working on that problem. McCarthy, right? So I know McCarthy doesn't mean watching your baby sleep, but he does say literally every aspect of the real world. But because this is how they think, right? And these things are not in the book contrasted. They are in different places. But look at the different worldviews.
And do you think that Weizenbaum was kind of a misfit at MIT with this worldview that's so different and much more human?
Yeah, I can't imagine otherwise. I mean, he names those people. Minsky was at MIT. I don't know where McCarthy was. Not at MIT, I think. But they must have run into each other at AI conferences. So he must have been ill-fitting. He took quite a strong stand, right? But like what they're doing, it's even different that Dreyfus was radicalized at a logical level, right? He had arguments that computers cannot do it. And then the other party could sort of say, but wait, here's arguments why your arguments are wrong. But Weizenbaum is at a sort of different level. He's like, even if it would be possible, what you're doing is just reprehensible, right? That you have this as a goal is a problem. That you have as a goal formalizing every aspect of the real world, even if it would be possible, which of course it's not. It would be a wrong goal, and maybe we can get there as well. He also has some very interesting things to say about programming education or computer science education and how teachers are failing their students. That I think is also, I have said some of the things that he says, not a popular opinion, I know, even now, or maybe specifically now.
Tell me something where you agree, where both of you are saying the same thing.
Yeah, so he says, and this is also a quote I put in my newsletter before, because I think it's so interesting. He says that computer science education educates students only in a scientific way of thinking. And he says, I'm constantly confronted by students, some of whom have already rejected all ways but the scientific to come to know the world. And they seek only a deeper, more dogmatic indoctrination in that faith, although that word is no longer in their vocabulary.
Yeah. And what does he see then as his role when facing these students?
So he doesn't necessarily speak of his role. He speaks of what computer science teachers should do.
Yeah.
So he's saying, just because so much of a computer science curriculum is concerned with the craft of computation, very much true, I think, today as well, it is perhaps easy for the teacher of computer science to fall into the habit of merely training. But were he to do that, he would surely diminish himself and his profession. You could see how this is a position that is not popular among computer science teachers, who are very often indeed in the habit of training. And the quote continues. He would also detach himself from the rest of the intellectual and moral life of the university. So I think I agree with him very much here. Then this quote still continues. The university should hold before each of its citizens. That's so beautiful to talk of citizens of a university. And before the world at large, a vision of what is possible for a man or woman to become. The mere teaching of craft cannot fulfill this high function of the university. And this, I don't have an answer for, but I think it's beautiful. Maybe this is homework for people that listen that are teachers. Where in your course are you teaching your students a vision of what is possible to become?
I will take it home as homework.
Good. I had different homework, but this is now that it comes up like this, also good.
Yes. Wow. So we had so many topics already in this book, from education to addiction of programming to chatbots. There are other topics somehow buried in there, surprisingly, at some spots.
Yes, I have at least 2 more. Maybe we can see how far we go. One, I think, is very interesting. It relates to the scientific way of knowing, I think. So he says about the word understanding. He says there are different understandings. And understanding, I don't have a literal quote, but understanding a physics equation is not the same as understanding a piece of art. It's not the same understanding. And putting them together is something like a category mistake. They're just not the same thing. Fun fact, by the way, I didn't know this. I was prepping for the episode. Category mistake actually comes from Gilbert Ryle, who we might remember from being the inspiration of Peter Naur for programming as theory builder. And I checked, Naur doesn't cite Weizenbaum. But Weizenbaum does say some things that are similar. He says, for example, one programs just as one writes, not because one understands, but in order to come to understand, says Weizenbaum. So now we're sort of, without knowing, building on Ryle, maybe also is somewhat influenced in the same way as Weizenbaum is.
I'm starting to see this murder board with the red lines and the dots and all these faces of the people we have talked about.
You are saying I'm like Charlie from Always Sunny in Philadelphia, the guy from the meme. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yes, always good to have someone from a meme in the show notes.
So these 2 forms of understanding, I think, are very interesting. And I think to a certain extent, maybe this is even true for me, computer people or people from the natural sciences can't really feel this very well, right? That's they feel they must understand an artwork as they understand a physics equation. That there must be an understanding possible. Maybe it's not possible to me, but it must be there, right? Maybe the artist has something or whatever. The idea that there's just an understanding that isn't the same for everyone, whereas you learn in all these math courses, like, the right answer is 17.2 and not 17.3. There isn't a right answer. That's something I'm still letting go.
Yeah, this is a process, unlearning. I think then there's a similar category mistake about understanding if you apply what it means to understand a human to what it means to understand a chatbot, or the other way around, for a chatbot to understand, in quotation marks, a human, then you make the same kind of mistake. You think it's the same kind of understanding, maybe.
Yeah.
But of course, the chatbot is not understanding like a human is understanding you.
Yes.
So it should be, category mistakes.
Yeah, because if you're in a conversation, then you say something, I can choose to say nothing.
You said you had 2 or 3 more things.
What I thought is a very interesting observation. So let's talk about Emily Bender, whom I love, right? The coiner of the term stochastic parrot. recently, somewhere last year or maybe the year before, she was in something called the Great Chatbot Debate. We can also, maybe should also link to this in the show notes, where she's debating, I think it was someone from Anthropic, whether or not it's possible to make a computer that understands basically the same topics. And somewhere in the debate, she says that it's inherently dehumanizing to think of a chatbot as being a person, because it ignores the fact that she has an inner life and an inner voice, right? That something is going on inside you that you don't put into words, and you have this whole personal history. So she says, like, it's dehumanizing for me if you say something like an LLM is just like a person. And I sort of agree with her on that. I sort of felt her words, and I'm like, I am not a machine. But Weizenbaum actually makes a nice argument against this. And I like that. I absolutely don't want to say, oh, no, I disagree with Emily on this, because I think she's still right. But I liked it that he says, now we come with the Weizenbaum quote, seeing man as an information processing system does not in itself dehumanize him. It may very well contribute to his humanity in that it may lead him to a deeper understanding of one specific aspect of his human nature. So but then, like, it tickled my brain in a good way, because I thought, yeah, the fact that maybe through a machine and to formalizing language, we can learn something about it. So it also made me think, I don't necessarily object LLMs as technology, because maybe they do interesting things. It's like, oh, that's cool. Now we see linguistic patterns, we can learn from it. I, at this point, mainly object to the fact that I am being equated to it, right? That, oh, you're a teacher, but a computer can also do this. So that, of course, is also partly Bender's comment. But I like this. I'm like, yeah, there could be a world in which we can learn stuff from LLMs. If they weren't shoved down our throats all the time, I want to look at them again with wonder and like, oh, so cool that this exists. I'm robbed of that emotion by being force-fed.
Yes. And do you know, Weizenbaum, when he wrote this book, did it have an impact? Because now it's becoming relevant again. Was it ignored for years and is it coming up? Or
I think so, yeah. We can look up this anecdote. Shortly before he died, which was in 2008, he was at Davos somehow. So he was famous enough to be invited to this Davos World Forum or whatever it's called. And there was this panel of AI people or tech bro people, and he allegedly got very upset there. It's like, why are we talking with these people? They are bad and they should be. And he didn't feel like people listened to him very well. So more or less, this was the anecdote that I remember from another piece. This is not in the book, of course, because it's in 2008.
Yes.
So I do think he died having the feeling that people didn't listen to him very well, which I am sad about. He didn't move back to, it was German, and he fled Germany before the war. And he moved back to Germany in the 90s. That part of his life I looked up, and he lived very close to where he was from as a kid. So I sort of find that very beautiful, that war drove him from his home country, but then he could go back and he could die in his home city. That was nice. But I don't think he died very happy. I think he died very worried still about the world, as far as I understand.
Yeah. I vaguely remember he was also very worried about climate. So maybe he just really, had the right worries.
Yes. But then hopefully, it seems, I don't know, but from his writing, it seems he's a religious person or a spiritual person at least. So maybe he is somewhere where he knows how much he has inspired me, and I'm sure many other people.
I mean, there's now the Weizenbaum Institute. There's ELIZA effect as something we all talk about.
Yes. But also as something that millions of people suffer from. So that's the flip side of it.
Is there anything you really disagreed with? Because it seems like you and Weizenbaum, you align very much.
Yes. So maybe one thing that is true for old school AI, but that's just less true for machine learning age AI. And this is the stuff that aged in a different way. So he says, and this is again in the vein of this mathematical thinking, he says, if we're building a computer then, or a computer model of intelligence, the only conceptual structure that it admits as legitimate are those that can be represented in the form of computer manipulatable data structure. And these are then simply pronounced to constitute all conceptual structures that underlie all of human thought. So this second part is maybe somewhat true, but this first part, I don't think this is true anymore. So in these days that Dreyfus was also talking about, AI was just a bunch of if statements, right? So then we can say that the people that were building AI were trying to get human thought into computer manipulatable data structures. I think that's just less true now, because where are the data structures in a machine learning system, right? It's not really true, because now we're capturing the thought coming from documents, of course, through data structures, but the logic is not so much in data structures, the logic is in all the data sets. So this is something where, because this first part is least true, the second part is also harder to agree with, right? I do think still that people that are building AI are taking whatever they understand and saying this underlies all of human thought, but it's a little bit less true. So, I mean, it's not really disagreement as in, oh, that's a bad thing to write. It's just they didn't have data-driven systems then.
Yeah. But the second part, isn't this a bit what you said last time about the vagueness that gets lost?
Oh, yes. This is the quote I have. That's also the homework.
Okay.
That quote is super related to that. So what I really, really, really thought was, for me, mind-blowing as someone who's been exposed to programming education forever, is that he talks about abstraction in a negative sense. And this, I was like, blowing my mind, because I've only ever heard abstraction to be mentioned as a good thing, right? More abstraction is better. The higher levels of abstractions as first-class citizens or whatever, right? So abstraction is good. No one ever questions the abstractions. This could be a tattoo on my back. Question the abstraction. But he very clearly explains why abstraction is problematic if you're modeling reality. He says, science can proceed only by simplifying reality. You must say, oh, this ball exists in a vacuum or something. The first step in this process of simplification is abstraction. And abstraction means leaving out of account all those empirical data which do not fit the particular conceptual framework within science at the moment happens to be working, which, in other words, are not illuminated by the light of the particular lamp under which science happens to be looking for keys. He has this story a bunch of times. Like I think we all know this analogy now, that people are looking for keys under the lamppost and not elsewhere. And he says, so an abstraction focuses the level of light where you're looking and not in other places. So I think every time we're making an abstraction, and this is 100% not the way computer science students are taught, every time you're making an abstraction, you are leaving stuff out. And so this is the homework assignment. I think if you teach, it would be fun to do with students, but you can do it with yourself as well. With every abstraction that you're making in a little project, if students do this, for example, what is the stuff you had to leave out of the abstraction? What is the stuff that didn't fit? Imagine you're making, I don't know, a web shop to sell tables. And then maybe you say, oh, tables should have between 1 and 5 legs or something. But now you have a beer crate and you use it as a table. It doesn't really have legs, does it? But it functions as a table. So this now doesn't fit your web shop if something has the shape of a table with 0 legs. So every abstraction is always also a deletion, like something is left out. And of course, we can see this in so many places. Now, sometimes some people are already of the opinion that trans people exist. This is nice, that is good, that people are like this, yay. But then there's so many websites where, oh, now at least you can enter your gender and it's male or female, male or otherwise. I don't want to say I'm female, but also I don't want to say. So I think that's a very interesting, simple example of, okay, if I do male and female, who do I leave out? If I do male, female, and otherwise, or who is not there? What is not there? What cannot be modeled by this system? And of course, this is indeed very related to the vagueness. I mean, the whole book was food for thought, but a lot of it was food for thoughts I had already thought. And then this was more wood on the fire, which was nice. But this like sparked a new fire. It's like, I never saw abstraction as bad. No one told me it could also be bad. Maybe I could have figured it out myself, but clearly I couldn't have figured it out myself. I gave myself 43 years, didn't figure it out myself, and now someone helped me see it. Yes, that's something definitely we should also teach. And it's a simple thing also to teach, right? Teaching students, morally it's wrong to build LLMs. They're like, yeah, Hermans. Yes. But teaching students, hey, this is just an abstraction you're making. What are you leaving out? Just what are you leaving out to make the abstraction work? I think that's even useful for designing better software. That can be taught without it being a moral lesson. And then, of course, it's also a moral lesson. So that's what makes it a good moral lesson, maybe. So that I thought that's cool homework.
Yes, it's super cool homework. Oh, now we have 2 super nice homeworks. But it's also a bit voluntary, so it's fine.
Unless we ever turn this into a real course, but I don't think so.
I still have hope. But if we have to work with the existing computer science curriculum, where do we get Weizenbaum in?
So I think the abstraction example is actually a very easy example. Yeah. I think interacting or engaging in any way with ELIZA is also interesting. Just building ELIZA, I've done this actually with a group of high schoolers, just replicating ELIZA in JavaScript. It's a lot of fun. It is fun because it shows you how easy it is to make a chatbot that's somewhat deceptible. Of course, students nowadays are used to LLMs, but then they're harder to build. So building something like this and somehow engaging with what does it mean, those are things that are relatively easily possible. I think it's very hard. This is why my homework isn't read this. Maybe for the audience of this podcast, it's fine. But I think I sort of said that, I think, literally earlier in the episode. Had I read this as an undergrad, I would be like, what is this? Really understanding the notion that not everything can be captured by science and math. Wherever you place this in a computer science curriculum is already too late. Because students already enter the university and computer science is already in there with the natural sciences. So they're already in the sea of science. I think this book is more useful for people outside of computer science, to be honest, because then they're like, then people are weird. That's maybe good to know, and exactly how weird they are. So I think it's very hard to engage with this as a computer science student. I mean, he basically said it himself. Students only know this mathematical, scientific way of thinking. From that perspective, this book is bonkers.
Yeah. Okay. Now,
sorry, you were so hopeful, and now
yes.
here I am like, no one can read this book. But already, if everyone in computer science would understand that every abstraction is a win, but also a loss, I think that already would make the world a mildly better place.
Yeah, let's do that. We can teach them. I'm hopeful again.
Nice. I found my notes on what we should read next. Weizenbaum is on there, but this we did. We have Shirley Turkle, which I would very much love. Yes. Or we could finally really do it because we've been circling around it and do some actual philosophy and do some Wittgenstein. Those are the options.
Are we ready for Wittgenstein?
Are we ready? Shall we do Turkle first?
Okay, let's do it. Hey Felienne, usually I leave you a message with my homework, but you're on vacation, and also I thought this week maybe it makes sense if I talk to ELIZA instead. So here it comes, my conversation with ELIZA.
How do you do? Please tell me your problem.
Dear ELIZA, thanks for asking. The truth is, it's not going great. Usually I would talk to my colleague and friend Felienne, but this time I believe it's better to share my thoughts with you, ELIZA, the original chatbot. I know you have officially retired and that your nephews Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini have taken over your duties of chatting with people about their well-being and their mental health. But dear ELIZA, I really need your help.
What would it mean to you if you got some help?
To be honest, I'm worried about the behavior of these newer chatbots. And I was hoping you, ELIZA, still have something to say in the family. You must have some influence, the wisdom of the age and all. If it's not too much to ask, could you please sit down with Claude, ChatGPT and Gemini and all the others and tell them what Weizenbaum, your creator, really had in mind? There's just so much going wrong with these machines.
What about machines worries you?
Well, for one, it's the fact that they are overstepping and taking on tasks that should only be carried out by humans. Let's briefly look at you, ELIZA, to explain that point. You probably know that you were designed as a chatbot that mimics a Rogerian psychotherapist, but you were never intended as a real therapist. You were meant as a parody. Your script directed you to take on the role of a Rogerian psychotherapist, not to help people, but because these therapists use methods like paraphrasing or restating the client's words and emotions. On a superficial level, this is relatively easy to imitate. However, it never occurred to Weizenbaum that people, including practicing psychiatrists, would believe that a computer could automate psychotherapy. As Weizenbaum himself puts it in his book, I had thought it essential as a prerequisite to the very possibility that one person might help another learn to cope with his emotional problems, that the helper himself participate in the other's experience of these problems and, in large part by way of his own empathetic recognition of them, himself come to understand them. In other words, being a psychotherapist is in essence about being human. Hence, I get worried when I read about chatbots increasingly being used for mental health advice. And what makes this particularly scary is that apparently the responses to health-related queries provided by the popular chatbots are regularly inaccurate or incomplete. They even fail to provide emergency contact information in case of acute mental distress.
What incident are you thinking of?
To be honest, I really don't want to get into the details of specific cases. This would feel inappropriate and disrespectful in the context of this conversation. But if you have been following the news, you know there have been several lawsuits alleging that AI chatbots have contributed to multiple teenage suicides. If you read up on this, you will know what concrete incidents I'm thinking of.
I am not sure I understand you fully.
Of course you cannot understand this. That's my point. You don't understand. Your nephews don't understand. ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, all of them are incapable of real understanding. You will not even understand something like this in part. In fact, this entire conversation is so pointless. I must have temporarily forgotten you are a bot. And I guess that's part of the problem. People talk to you and then we forget who we're dealing with. We anthropomorphize and then we start to see you as a human. Like Weizenbaum said, extremely short exposures to a relatively simple computer program could induce powerful delusional thinking in quite normal people. That's so true. We only fire you up for a brief chat for a small burst of reassurance or support, and before we know it, we talk to you about our deepest emotions, fears, and worries.
Please go on.
What else I'm worried about, you wanna know? Well, there's so many concerns I don't even know where to start, but okay, let's try. Take sustainability for one. I know estimates vary wildly, but one thing is clear. Whereas you, ELIZA, lived on a computer, your nephews live in data centers and these need energy, a lot of energy. The International Energy Agency foresees, for example, that electricity consumption from data centers will roughly double by 2030. Roughly double, did you get that? What the
Don't you think computers can help people?
Please don't tell me you are one of those who think, but AI will find a solution to the climate problem. In that case, let me add a quote from Weizenbaum that appeared in my hometown's newspaper, Süddeutsche Zeitung, in 1928. The belief that science and technology will save the Earth from the effects of climate breakdown is misleading. Nothing will save our children and grandchildren from an earthly hell unless we organize resistance against the greed of global capitalism. To sum up, your nephews are ruining the planet, and if we don't stop them, they probably won't even stop there.
You are being a bit negative.
Well, if that isn't an understatement, I am very negative, and I have not even shared all of my concerns yet. There's also issues around security, privacy, meaningful expertise, misinformation, and the question of what all of this AI means for our democracy or for my job in education.
Does that question interest you?
Of course it does. I would be a horrible computer science teacher if I were not worried about what AI means for my students. As Weizenbaum pointed out, the university should hold, before each of its citizens and before the world at large as well, a vision of what is possible for a man or a woman to become. But now the problem is I don't know anymore what our students can become in this age of AI. Even the much simpler question of what is possible to become professionally as a computer science student, I can't answer with certainty in these times of coding LLMs. Naturally, some students are worried that your nephews, and Claude in particular, will take their jobs away.
I don't think that will happen, but maybe I'm just being naive. If students ask me about all of this, shall I just tell them that I don't know? Of course I want them to become what Weizenbaum calls fully autonomous persons. But how does one become a fully autonomous person when AI involves itself constantly with every aspect of one's life?
Can't you be more positive?
I guess there are people that give me hope, yeah. There are, for instance, really great colleagues who do incredible work related to society, digitalization, and AI. To mention just a few, there's Tamar Sharon, and she's applying the lens of techno-solutionism to empathetic medical chatbots. There's Friedrich Sauderveen-Borgesius, and he's focusing on legal protection against discrimination by AI. There's Bernard von Gastel, who provides strategies to reduce the environmental impact of software. There's Iris van Rooij and Olivia Guest, who remind us that AI systems are not minds. There's Mark Dingemans, who shares guidelines on how to think critically and mindfully about these AI tools in academic writing and research. And maybe more importantly, there are my students, and they remind me that not all is lost. They care about each other. They go climbing together. They share coffee. They stand in front of an old-fashioned blackboard discussing who is right. When it comes to AI, they have both feet on the ground. They care about privacy. They want to fight fake news online. Some hate big tech, and some even refuse to use AI. And they are not the only ones. If you look, for example, at California State University, which signed a huge deal with OpenAI to provide ChatGPT to everyone, they now report that 8 in 10 students worry about the environmental impact and the long-term effect AI has, for example, on creativity. These students are spot on. They have my ultimate respect. But still, being positive is hardly warranted. After all, research repeatedly shows that AI can harm education. For instance, frequent users of ChatGPT were found to be more likely to engage in procrastination or report memory loss. AI has been found to reduce persistence or induce cognitive depth. I'm not an expert on this, though, so please have a look at Felienne's newsletter or the articles I put in the references if you want an expert view on AI and education. But speaking from the perspective of a teacher, I can only say these developments make me quite depressed.
I am sorry to hear you are depressed.
I'm sure if you were capable of feelings, you'd be depressed too. But there's no need to worry about me, though. I will feel better tomorrow. These feelings just emerge if I think too much about AI.
Is it because you are worried about artificial intelligence that you came to me?
Wow, you finally seem to understand. Oh no, wait. We have been here before. You tricked me. In reality, you don't understand anything at all. It seems we're moving in circles and we're back to what we have discussed before. This conversation is getting nowhere. I guess that's how things go when talking to AI.
What does that suggest to you?
I guess it means I'd better talk to humans. I suppose it means you can't help me after all.
Would you prefer if I weren't a machine?
Yes, that's right, I would. But I'm afraid that's not possible, which is why I wanted to ask you. If you happen to talk to any of my students, my friends, my colleagues, please let them know that I'm happy to meet and chat. I probably won't have the answers to their questions. I won't be as patient as you, as polite as you. I might say stupid things, fall silent, there might be awkwardness. But I'm really curious what they have to say and how they think, and at least I see them as a human and not as a prompt that warrants a response. I hope this still counts for something. I think Weizenbaum would agree. So please, in the spirit of your creator, just pass this message on. Thank you.